Welcome back, friends. I just got back from taking the dogs for a walk. It is a beautiful day outside, so hopefully you get a chance to get outside today. We are on chapter 14 of The Mighty Miss Malone, and we will read both chapters 14 and 15. And I took a long walk, so I might need to take a drink sometimes during this video. Sorry about that. Chapter 14, The Sad Truth About Jokes. Clarice was early. I was sitting on the couch, reading, when she tapped on the door. "You ready?" She had her books in her arms. We hugged, and I said, "Just a second, Clarice." "Take your time. I want to read this last chapter once more anyway." I ran up the steps to my room to get the books. I had to return to the library. Me and Jimmy had started taking turns staying with Father. I'd go to the library with Clarice every other day, and Jimmy would go over to Dr. Bracey's and out to the fields to get wild vegetables on the days it wasn't his turn to watch Father. I started to stick my head into Mother and Father's room to say goodbye. Jimmy and Father were whispering. Whispers grab a hold of your attention like nothing else. Me and Father never talked about what happened on the lake, so I was surprised to hear him say, "There we were on Lake Michigan, pulling in fish right and left." Jimmy said, "Perch?" "Perch, walleye, bluegills." We noticed a fog bank further out on the lake, and someone thought we could head back, but we stayed a little longer. He stopped. I held my breath, waiting for what he was about to say, but Jimmy said, "Why is it called a fog bank, Pa? It's not like you could get alone there, or like you could rob it or nothing." Father said, "Not a bank in that way, then, more like a mound, an area higher than what's around it." I bet he was staring over Jimmy's shoulder, trying to get deep into his story. I stuck my head into the room. I didn't really want to hear this. "Goodbye, Father. I'm off to the library." "No, Thessa, you come in and listen too." Jimmy said, "Pa's telling what happened out on the lake." Father said, "We weren't out there for half an hour before the fog rolled in." Father was talking, but he wasn't talking to us. I never thought about what a strange phrase, "pea soup," is, but when that fog covered our boat, I got it. The fog felt like it had weight that you had to push away even to breathe. There was a long pause, and I held my breath, hoping that Jimmy would be quiet too. We decided to get back to Thor, but when we pulled on the anchor rope, we found the anchor was gone and we'd been drifting. No one knew how long. Then the ship came. Then everything happened. His voice changed, sounding like he was fighting to catch his breath, sounding wild and scary. We drifted into the tipping length, and the wake from the huge freighter hit us and knocked everyone out of the boat. I was in such a state of shock that I didn't even realize I'd been hit in the mouth and all my front teeth were gone, or how badly I'd been cut. Fear will do that to you. It will make you think only about what's important. And all that was important to me was to get back to my family. That's all I could think of, truly. Most times when Father tells us how his day went, he talks like he's painting a picture. But this time there was no picture, just fog. If he was himself, Father would have said something like, "The fog was so thick, it should have been spelled with 2 G's. But there was something more missing. Father can't open his mouth without a joke falling out, and this story didn't have any jokes. Maybe it's because the story is so sad. But Father always tells us there's a thin, blurry line between humor and tragedy. When he was working regular at the mill, he told me and Jimmy, "I'll give each of you 1 whole nickel for every joke you find that isn't cloaked in pain or tragedy." We tried as far as we could to earn that nickel, but couldn't come up with a single joke that didn't have someone getting killed or hurt or made fun of or embarrassed or mocked. Father told us, And the more tragic something is, the more jokes you'll find about it. I couldn't think of anything more tragic than what happened to those poor men out on Lake Michigan. Yet Father's story didn't have one smile or laugh in it. And no alliteration. Something wasn't right. Father said, the boat was upside down and they were all gone. I tied my wrist up to the boat with the anchor rope and hung on. That's the way that Sip found me and took me to the hospital in Chicago. When I came to, they brought me to Gary. That's the whole truth. There was another long pause. That's everything. Jimmy leaned his head on Father's chest. It's okay, Pa. We're all together now. Father didn't sound like his heart was in it when he said, you know, Jimmy, when it looked like I couldn't live, the thing, other than my family, that I thought about missing would be seeing Joe Louis knock Max Schmeling back into fatherland. That stupid fight! Father started babbling about Joe Louis, and Jimmy babbled right along with him. I said, yuck, and left them laughing and joking. That was chapter 14. Here is chapter 15. The Brown Bomber hits home. Do you remember whose nickname is the Brown Bomber? We'll continue reading and see if it rings any bells. Finally, Father made the bug about the fight grab hold my heart. The big day had been postponed until the 19th because of rain, and that made everything even more exciting. Since the lake, Father had acted like he was listening when we talked about our days during Chow Chat, but we knew his mind wasn't all the way with us. Just 2 days before the fight, something came alive in him. We looked at Father to see if he was up to talking. Jimmy saw something that me and Mother didn't. He said, and what about your day, my fine, friendly father figure? Father seemed surprised. Not much happened. Then he gave us his scary jack-o'-lantern smile. Why is she comparing his smile to a jack-o'-lantern? Think about it. He's missing a lot of front teeth from the accident. How does that mimic a jack-o'-lantern? Think about it. But I've noticed, my dear Dwight, the gorgeous, gregarious, glamorous Deza hasn't found fit to form the flimsiest conversation concerning the coming fisticuffs. Alliteration! A ton of alliteration! It was like all of the consonants he hadn't used for the past weeks were exploding out of him. Jimmy laughed. Wow, Daddy. Father said, so if none of you mind, I think I'll use my time to explain the mighty Miss Malone what is going on that she has such little interest in. He looked right at me. The first time in a long time he looked at any of us right in the eye. So, Dardwat, why aren't you on the bandwagon about Joe Louis? Clarice and me, Mother said. Aye, Deza. I and Clarice. Not funny, Deza, Mother said. Clarice and I. Don't think there's anything about two grown, old, bumpy-muscled men in their underwear trying to kill each other with big, fat, puffy, ridiculous red mittens that's good or important or even worth talking about. Father put his face in his hand and shook his head. Jimmy said, and I thought you were smart, Deza. Even white people are saying they'd vote for the Brown Bomber to be king of the free world after he whips Schmeling. Brown Bomber is Joe Louis, the boxer, if you forgot. Father moved his hand from his face and stared over Mother's shoulder. Another real good sign, because that meant he was settling into a story or a lesson. Deza, this is so much more than just a fight. This is one of those rare occasions where we'll be alive to witness history. He smiled at me and stuck his left hand out. I put both of mine in it, and he covered my hands with his right one. I was surprised at how soft Father's hand felt. They used to be rough like sandpaper or even a hunk of wood, but since the lake, they'd gotten as soft as mine. Father looked real close at our hands and said, "My, my, my. Wasn't it only yesterday I could close my fingers on yours like this, and your whole hand would disappear?" He was right. My fingers were poking out of the other side of his hands. He brought our hands to his face and kissed my fingertips. "Dardwat, you know you and I are different, right?" "Of course, Father. You're a man, I'm a girl, you're old, and I'm young." Jimmy said, "Yeah, Pa, plus Des has got regular teeth, and you got them summer teeth. Some are in your mouth, and some are at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Some are still in the hospital." Mother said, "Jimmy!" Father said, I see both of my children are reading from that book about disrespecting and abusing a good man. Deza, I meant to say you and I are alike because we're different than most people." "Yes, Father, we know the Malones aren't like any other family in the world." "True, but even within the Malone family, you and I look at the world in a way that your mother and brother don't." Jimmy, Mother, and me all said, "Thank goodness for that." Father laughed. "Good, we're all agreed. I hope we can also agree that people tend to leave a trail as to where they've been, and from that trail you can tell where they're going, right?" "Yes, Father." "All right," Father said. Another thing we need to get by is faith in one another. Over time, we can tell if someone is reliable or not, if we can count on their word or not, right?" Father was starting to come back. This was the way he used to talk. And what he was doing was something he taught us to be suspicious of. He said that people use tricks to get you to think the way they do, or to take something that you have that they want. One way they do that is to interrupt your normal way of thinking and take you by the hand and guide you down the path they want you to take. Father says they make you take a teeny-weeny step in their direction, and then they start to nudge you a little further down the path, and before you know it, you're running full speed with them in a direction that you probably wouldn't have gone all alone. If someone was trying to pull that trick on one of us, Father had come up with a signal. We would take both hands and pretend they were on a steering wheel and move them back and forth like we were driving. It was called being a passenger in the Manipulomobile, and it let all other Malones know that someone is trying to take us for a ride. I said, "Father," and I put my hands on the pretend steering wheel. He laughed. "Very good, Dardwat. I was waiting for you to do that, which is why I prefaced this by telling you that, over time, you know whom you can have faith in, right?" "Yes, Father." "Because I want you to consider the source here. Keep in mind that I'm the one trying to educate you on why this fight is so important, so there's no Manipulomobile on the road here." Are we reading from the same book? We were. It was good to hear Father explaining something to me again. And it's a fact, Jimmy, sometimes getting educated on a subject has a lot in common with being manipulated. The main difference is that you know to trust the person who's guiding you. "I understand," I said. "Great. Here's why this is more than just a fight. Sad to say, the boxing ring is one of the few places in America where your skin color doesn't play a huge role. When you've got two men going against each other, wearing a pair of ridiculous puffy mittens most of the time, it's a reasonably fair fight." Father looked over Jimmy's shoulder. "Steele Long used to say it was the only place where a black man could hit a white man and not get lynched for it. It's a terrible thing." We all held our breaths to see if talking about Mr. Steele Long was going to make him stop or take him back out on that lake. He looked at Mother and said, "Hitler and his boys said this fight will prove that no black man can ever beat a white man, that we," Father pointed at each Malone, "in all our neighborhoods where we are, because we deserve to be there." Jimmy said, "Yeah, Pops, I can't wait. Joe's going to show him a thing or two." Father said, That's what we're hoping for, James. Joe knows he's got to win this fight. He knows how important it is. He'll come through. Some of the time, life boils down to some pretty ridiculous things, Deza. This is one of them. Apologize. I agree it's silly to put so much importance on one fight. But you have to keep in mind that this fight is the one chance we have to show the Nazis, and some of our white brethren here in America as well, that we are people too. It's ironic, but Joe will show we're human by savagely beating the stuffing out of someone. I would have believed anything my father was saying because it was in his own strong voice. I was going to have faith in my father's word. I was going to try to make a light come on for Clarice, because the more I thought about it, the madder I got at myself for not seeing this on my own earlier. The man on the radio screamed, "The greatest upset in the history of the world! The greatest upset in the history of the world! The greatest upset in the history of the world!" Mr. Bobbin reached over and turned off his radio. No one in the barbershop moved or talked or even breathed for what felt like an hour. No one looked at anyone else. The most interesting thing in Mr. Bobbin's barbershop was the floor, because as I looked around, that was where everyone's eyes were pointing. Was it really interesting? The only thing making a sound or moving was the fan as it swept from side to side. The bell over Mr. Bobbin's door gave that gentle ting-a-ding as people started leaving. Mother grabbed Father's arm, tapped Jimmy and Clarice on the shoulder, and nodded at me. The bell tinkled again, and we followed Mother and Father outside. I wonder what happened. I hope to never see anything else as terrible as that walk home. Grown men and women were sitting on the curb crying like babies. Every light in every store, in-house we passed was still on, but now they threw jaggedy, sharp shadows onto the street. Father's lisp was back. I can't believe it, Peg. It's like that fog on the lake. I never thought I'd see or feel anything like it again, but here it is. This is just as heavy on my heart. This is the same feeling. Oh, God, Peg. Won't I ever get rid of this? Is something wrong with me? Mother wrapped her arm around Father's shoulder. Clarice was squeezing my left hand, and Jimmy was squeezing my right hand as we walked. Father said, "What is going?" I looked back, and my mother shushed Father. "Wait till we get home. It'll be okay." We walked in silence for a couple of blocks and saw a huge bottle that someone had dropped or slammed onto the sidewalk. It had broken to 1,000 little puddles of light. The only way you could tell it had been a bottle was because of the label being still whole, still hanging on to a few sharp jags of glass. Jimmy pointed and said, "Look out." Father scooped me into his arms. "Deza, you know how you are with broken glass." I almost said, "Father, I'm okay." But then I saw he was holding me, as much to take care of himself as to take care of me. I let my father carry me like a doll on his hip. I leaned into his neck, and Mother grabbed his waist. It was strange. I was squeezing him, but it seemed like I couldn't feel him. I was so frightened. When we got to the Clarice's, she let Jimmy's hand go and looked up at me in Father's arms. At the same time, we put up 2 fingers, touched our cheeks, and then put up 1 finger and put our hands on our chests. I didn't notice 6 or 7 of Clarice's brothers sitting on the porch in a little ball crying until the Malones started for home. I wonder what happened. What an intense and sorrowful ending. There are quite a few extended response questions today. If I don't give you any options for an A, B, C, or sometimes D multiple choice answer, that means that you need to have a complete sentence, capital letters, your sentence is organized, you have punctuation, and your spelling is as accurate as you can sound out. Again, I haven't heard anything from the technology department So that means that I have been unable to fix the Google Classroom issue. So just like I said yesterday, if this continues happening, I will email and GroupMe message out the link to this chapter reading on YouTube. We'll also send chapters 14 and 15 comprehension questions in the same message. So in the 2 chapters that we read today, your first question is to retell. Retell, so you're summarizing. Tell me what happened to Father and his friends out on the lake. Try to come up with 5 different parts of the story. 5 important events from his story about what happened to them on the lake, and use details. You can write it like a list. You can use first, then last. However you want to write it, as long as you have complete sentences. Number 2. On page 121, now you obviously don't have a book at home, but it's the part of the book where Father asks Deza this question. Are we reading from the same book? What does this statement mean? Now let me read this part to you again. 121. Can you believe we're this far in the book? Okay, so this is Father talking here. He laughed. Very good, Dardwat. I was waiting for you to do that. The hands on the steering wheel gesture. Which is why I prefaced this by telling you that over time, you know whom you can have faith in, right? Deza said, yes, Father. Father says, because I want you to try to consider the source here, talking about himself. Keep in mind that I'm the only one trying to educate you on why this fight is so important. There's no manipulation happening here. Are we reading from the same book? Deza says, we were. It was good to hear Father explaining something to me again. So when he says, are we reading from the same book? What do you think this phrase means? Does it mean he is asking Deza if she took his book and was reading it too, an actual physical book? He was trying to see if Deza agrees with him, or he is wondering if Deza has a good book for him to read. Which of those makes most sense? Only 2 more questions for these chapters, and they're both extended responses. Question 3, how does Father explain the fight to Deza and its importance? So the brown bomber, Joe Louis, how does he explain to Deza why the fight is so important and what the deal is? To convince her, oh wow, this is actually kind of a big deal. Make sure you use details from the story that you remember. And then our last question today, does Joe win the fight? It does not explicitly say in the story whether he won or not. So if you keep going back and trying to hear, Joe won or Joe lost, you're not going to hear it. Okay? You have to use context clues. You have to use the tone of the ending of chapter 15 to figure out whether Joe Louis won the fight or not. You also need to explain how you know. How do you know that he won? Or how do you know that he lost? What details from the story tell you either way is true? Okay? So that is it for chapters 14 and 15. Hopefully by tomorrow I will hear back from the technology department. If I haven't, I will do the same thing as I did today, where I send the lesson and materials and read aloud and materials for the read aloud in an email at the end of the day, and then throughout the day on GroupMe. So if you have not joined our GroupMe chat yet, I really recommend you do it because that's the fastest way to get information, and that's where I communicate the most frequently with families. So I hope you had a great day. Like I said, if you haven't already, get outside, enjoy the weather, maybe listen to this chapter outside, and I will see you guys in the morning. Have a great day. Bye.